Chef AJ Live. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and this is where I introduce you to amazing people like you who are doing great things in the world that I think you should know about.
Hi, everybody.
I'm meeting today's guest for the first time. I actually saw her on a summit last year, and I thought she was absolutely fabulous, but it took a while to get on because I'm booked several months in advance. She is not only a board-certified pediatrician practicing in Washington, D.C., she's also board-certified in lifestyle medicine, which I think is kind of really an interesting combination. And her name is Dr. Qadira Huff. Please welcome her to the show. It's very nice to meet you.
Thank you, Chef AJ. This is such an honor and a privilege to be on your show. And as I was telling you before we went live, I've been following you for years. And so this is super exciting to be able to talk and to share about a topic that I'm very passionate about.
Well, you are very passionate. That's what I love about you. And it's such an honor to me that a doctor would even know who I am. And I find it so interesting because being certified in lifestyle medicine, I always tell people when they're looking for a doctor, whatever the specialty, see if you can get somebody that's also certified in lifestyle medicine, because I make sure I do that whenever possible. But like a kid doesn't choose to go to you. You know what I mean?
Right.
So like that's probably not that important to the child.
Not at that moment. You know, they're really thinking about like the next day, the next hour, like very kind of present focus, which is a beautiful way to live in its own way. But it's the job of the parent to be thinking, 1 or 2 or 10 steps into the future.
Yeah. So the job of the parent, it's really easy for me to say, feed your kids healthy. I don't have any kids because I understand that that's such a struggle for people. And we have a mutual friend, Sharon McRae, who is such a proponent of not just healthy eating in general for just life or disease prevention because of her strong family history of cancer, but especially where kids are concerned. But I don't want to beat parents up, but some of them, I don't know if they're all doing their best. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's complicated. And, full disclosure, I'm a mom too. I'm a mom of a young child, and I'm also the bonus mom of a 21-year-old. So we have kind of the college age and then also the preschool age. But in my practice, I see kids from newborn to 21 years old. And what I see and what I believe is parents, by and large, they are doing their best. But there's such different circumstances that parents have to parent in. And I will say in this particular moment of the past year, the stress, like the collective stress has been at unprecedented levels. And really, I've seen a lot of families have to make tough calls in terms of, working versus, having, safety in their households because they were worried about bringing COVID in and, knowing that they are really kind of juggling fewer resources financially and trying to make ends meet, and then also parent and think about serving healthy food. So it's a lot of balls in the air. But what I see is parents are also pretty coachable too. So, parents are stretched thin right now, but there's also a high degree of caring and a deep desire to want to do the best by their kids. And that's what attracted me to pediatrics to begin with, because parents do want to do the best. They might not even do the best by themselves sometimes, but once they hear the information and they feel like they have support, they want to do the best by their kids. They really do.
Yeah. That's so interesting that you see them at such a wide variety of ages, because I didn't have the benefit of having a pediatrician growing up because my family is a medical family. So, I saw my grandfather, which, but I think that would be so cool. Back in the day, you used to give not you, but doctors used to get a shot, get a lollipop.
And at the dentist too. I remember getting a lollipop at the dentist when I was growing up. Now I'm like, maybe not the best.
So things have changed in your office. You give them an apple, huh?
Exactly. Here's a sticker. We try to do the non-edibles as much as possible.
Right. I love the name of your business, Sprouting Wellness, because I think of it like it's like a double entendre, like this, because kids, like, they sprout, they get bigger.
Yep. You hit the nail on the head. And it's a business that I founded actually in the past year. It had been in the works for a while, even before COVID hit. And I feel like the need for a business like this is even more, it's been accentuated over the past year. But essentially, Sprouting Wellness is about providing coaching and support to families around issues of lifestyle, whether it's how to get my family transitioned into plant-based nutrition, how can we optimize health as a household, how can we, bring in more regular movement. Basically, how do we create a culture of health at home. And the reality is, as a primary care pediatrician, this is not foreign information, but it's also information that we simply do not have the time to really delve into as much as we really need to, given the fact that, we know the majority of chronic disease could be preventable when we institute these core lifestyle habits. So it's critical, it's fundamental. And that's what Sprouting Wellness is all about, how to really guide families and work with families to create that culture of health at home.
Well, it's so much easier. It's as difficult as it is. It's so much easier when they're younger. People don't realize that, that's why I'm so passionate about the summit I do called The Truth About Weight Loss, because when you have diseases of any kind, lifestyle or any other, they don't get easier as you get older. They get harder. And being the fat kid growing up, it was not pleasant. And I don't want this for children, even though I don't have any. And that's why I think kids are bigger today than they were in the 60s when I was growing up.
Everybody is, yeah. Absolutely. And, I think you're right in terms of really starting a foundation as early on in life as possible. Because what we know also, like the risk of adult chronic disease, that starts in childhood. So it's not even about like the health of the kid in that moment, in that, early 10 years. It's like, what am I doing for my adult risk of chronic disease too? So there's so many levels. And, one thing that I've been studying more and more is in terms of that intergenerational health, from the perspective of like a mother's health, how that impacts her fetus or her unborn child. So there's so many levels here. And so essentially starting as early upstream as we can to laying this foundation is so important.
Have you read any of Dr. Furman's books like Disease Proof Your Child or Fast Food
Read that
Genocide?
one. Yes.
Because I don't have kids, but I still read it. And to hear that like all adult cancers or most of them are caused by what a kid eats at 10 years of life, I'm thinking like, a lot of us are screwed. So, parents need to at least know this so they can make an informed decision.
Absolutely. I think that there's a lot of levels of intervention, right? Like education is one of the most important roots of intervention, where like that's hitting on the individual level. But then there's also kind of the other levels involved too, when we think about the food system, which is going to be something that I talk a good amount today, and access to food, and even thinking about marketing and all of these things that are kind of stacked against us as a nation, as a world in creating good health. But, at the end of the day, it all boils down to like what we choose to do. But, it's important to take into context that context in which we're all living, and having some advocacy as well.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know. It's just mind blowing sometimes.
It is mind blowing. It really is. It really is. And, realizing how much power we have to change the trajectory of future adults in childhood. That's what motivates me and keeps my passion going as a pediatrician, because like, it's not just about the kid in front of you, it's multiple generations to come as well.
Yeah. I remember when I was little, my grandmother was a type 2 diabetic, like in her 60s, and they called it diabetes, and they didn't call it type 2 back then because it was juvenile diabetes. They didn't need a type 2 because kids weren't getting the adult version. And to me, people should be very upset about this. First of all, nobody needs to have diabetes, type 2 anyway. We know it's lifestyle, but the fact that young children have this disease and they put kids on statins now, that can't be good to be giving kids drugs that are, that just bothers me on so many levels.
It bothers me too. And, just once that process starts, like we were saying, like it is very challenging to reverse it. But at the same time, children are so resilient. And I've definitely seen children in my practice who have type 2 diabetes, like early type 2 diabetes, like things hadn't become very entrenched, or they're kind of at that cusp of pre-diabetes / a new diagnosis of diabetes. And, with intensive lifestyle changes, being able to reverse that hemoglobin A1C. And so those are the stories that keep me moving and fueled, to recognize, yes, things are feeling kind of dire, especially in the midst of COVID. But with children, there's a lot of resilience too. There's a lot of ability to turn things around in a way that we don't often see in adults, especially when you have that champion parent who's really, really going gung-ho in terms of, we're going to make a whole household change. Everybody's on board. And we see good results as a result of that.
How has, I live in a senior gated community. There's like, I don't generally see children in general, and all my nieces and
Yeah.
nephews are now in their 30s. But how is COVID, or how has COVID been affecting
Oh,
children?
so many ways. It's like, how much time do we have?
No, but
There have been
really, like, because I mean, not just the social, yeah, because what's it like for a kid
It's
today?
been extremely challenging, pretty much from every angle as it relates to child's development and health. First and foremost, like it's been an extremely isolating and lonely time for a lot of children, especially like our adolescents. This is the time when they are supposed to be flying the coop, like they should be out and socializing and developing their identities, and they're stuck in the house on screens all day long with school, and then using a lot of social media as their form of social interaction, which we know that's inadequate. Like we're social animals, especially at that age. So it's taken a huge mental health toll of children of all ages. So we're seeing a lot of need for referrals to mental health providers, and that system has been saturated. There are very few openings in our area. Also changed eating habits, like people are home, there are not that many other outlets, the extracurricular activities aren't present, and so they're at home just snacking all day long. And then there's been that kind of economic and financial toll that it's taken on a lot of families with job loss and maybe reduced hours at work, and that means that the financial makeup of families has been really different, and I think that has also impacted food habits as well, in terms of what are we buying, what can we afford, and the habits that were present before have just been really different because of those external factors and changes.
Yeah. You talk about the screen time, but even before COVID, I think the screen time that most kids were experiencing was not so great.
Oh, it was high to begin with, and now it's just kind of like literally almost into the double digits for some kids. From the moment they wake up to the moment they go to bed, on a screen of some sort, whether it's for school, and then after school, it's just like they're gaming, throughout the whole evening, and sleep has been turned on its head. It's just been a mess. It's been a real disaster, and so I'm very heartened by many school systems starting to slowly open up doors, if they can do so safely, even if it's in a hybrid form, to get kids back in school and to try to create a routine again.
Yeah.
So,
One of the issues I hear so much from parents is that not both of them are on board with healthy
mhm,
eating. And
mhm, mhm.
it's like one efforts get sabotaged by the other, whether intentionally or unintentionally. I don't, because
Correct.
I don't, there seems to be this thing that if we don't give kids crap food, they're not going to have a good childhood.
Right. Yes. I think what you're getting at is food means something different to everybody, and it means a lot of different things to most people. Food can take on that role of being a reward. Food is culture. Food is comfort. Food is a lot of things, and for a lot of people, especially parents, we have very challenged relationships with food, and we often pass that, sometimes I'll say challenged, relationship with food to our children. And I think that when it comes to a health issue developing in your child, when it's like a wake up call, like, oh gosh, we need to make changes, some parents aren't ready to make that change, because that means they have to reckon with their own relationship with food, which can be really, really hard. So I think that's where some of that comes from, just like really relying on their own sometimes dysfunctional patterns and not really knowing an alternative way to handle food. But I think that moving away from food as comfort, food as a reward, as much as possible, that's one of the most important. That's one of the most important, I think, first steps a lot of parents can make. Trying to make it more neutral.
Yeah. And a lot of parents say, well, my kid's a picky eater. Well, that's because you did that. I mean, kids are not naturally picky eaters.
Right.
But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
when you have crap food and healthy food, nobody's
Hard
going
to
to pick the
compete.
healthy food.
Yes, exactly. It's true, and one of the pieces of advice I give often in clinic is when a parent's like, all they'll eat is chicken nuggets and French fries. I'm like, Well, what if we don't put that on the plate? Or maybe if we put one chicken nugget and like a couple of fries instead of making the whole plate that and nothing green, nothing fresh. So it's like kids will eat what they're given, especially if you catch them when they're hungry. That's that magical window. If a child is hungry enough, they're going to eat what you serve. And I think that that kind of connects to why it's important for a lot of ways to move away from this constant snacking, because kids aren't being allowed to get hungry for mealtime. And so we like plan snacks out in advance, because kids of some ages, they do need to snack. If they're younger, their metabolisms and their rate of growth, they require more frequent eating. That's fine. But when we're getting into like older middle adolescents and older adolescents, we don't need to be eating all day long. And so allowing kids to get hungry and then offer them the more healthful, well-rounded meals is a pro tip that I try to share with a lot of my families.
But that's good for everybody at every age.
It is. It really is.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because, when you're hungry, you'll eat vegetables. Seriously, that's my motto. If you're not hungry enough to eat vegetables, you're not hungry.
You're not hungry. You're eating for one of the other laundry list of reasons, but it's not physical hunger. It's not that.
So neat. I love that you say that. Do
Yeah.
Kids need to be taking the same supplements as adults? Like, if you've been on a plant-based diet, obviously we need B12, but do kids need that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Children do need many of the same supplements that I would encourage for, a plant-based adult to take. So B12 is a non-negotiable. Vitamin D, I would consider a non-negotiable too, for children and adults, especially when we're looking at kind of overall risk of disease, chronic disease, and even COVID. Making sure you're sufficient in vitamin D is important. And then for children specifically, omega-3s. I am more and more advocating for supplementation. I know we have like growing research to support that it's a critical building block in terms of brain development and thinking about, memory and cognitive function and the benefits that can come from omega-3s. I would advocate for young children, especially, to have that on board with whatever multi they're getting with the vitamin D and B12.
Yeah. And so do you agree that a 100% plant-based diet is adequate for children at all ages?
Absolutely, absolutely. And one word that often comes to the fore of these conversations is well planned, or two words, well planned. That's usually the asterisk. Like we have the American, Association of Nutrition and Dietetics. They came out with their position paper several years ago, noting this is safe at all ages and stages of even lactation and pregnancy and throughout the span of childhood, right? It's safe and adequate if it's asterisk well planned. And so one thing that I counter is every diet for children should be well planned. And when we look at the fact that, we do have these early chronic diseases taking root in childhood, we do have nutritional deficiencies, thinking about fiber and, other kind of vitamins. The kind of standard American diet is not well planned, in my opinion. And so it's like we need to have that asterisk as well when it comes to the standard American diet, and not just single out, more of a whole plant-based diet as needing to be well planned. They all need to be well planned.
Yeah, it sounds like, chicken nuggets and French fries are not planned at all.
I don't think so.
Yeah, what drives me crazy is those smash cakes. It's like, why would you do that to a 1-year-old? You could do anything. You could do shaving cream. They don't care.
They really don't care.
Like this.
And just like getting that, like probably for the first time for many of the kids, that bolus of sugar, that introduction of like highly refined sugar, probably not the best introduction at that early an age, especially.
That's child abuse. So we have a couple questions from live viewers. Carolyn says, does Dr. Huff get any pushback from other physicians with her approach to treating her patients?
More and more, this is becoming much more accepted, even if it's something that another colleague or physician doesn't necessarily advocate proactively for themselves. None of my partners and none of the folks that I interact with professionally would argue, hey, offering fruits and veggies and whole grains and beans, legumes, and seeds is as the foundation of a diet. Nobody's going to say that's a bad idea. And I think that more and more when we have, healthful alternatives. In pediatrics world, cow's milk, that's been historically a huge point of contention. And it would be considered heresy up until very recently to say kids don't need milk. They don't need cow's milk. But now if I were to say that, which I have and I shared, and I share this with many of my patients, it's accepted because we have great alternatives. We have like soy milk, for instance, which is what I advocate for my younger patients, fortified, comparable calcium, vitamin D, it's got B12 in it. Nobody's going to argue with that. And even with WIC, like the Women, Infants, and Children's, the Supplemental Nutrition Program for children under 5, they now allow for soy milk as an alternative to cow's milk, and even for infant formula, getting a soy-based formula. So I think the tide is definitely turning, I will say professionally, for greater acceptance of a plant-based diet.
Yeah. They'll, because I've heard from so many people, well, my pediatrician says you have to have milk. And how do we educate the pediatricians that don't know what you know, that keep saying that? It's not true.
I think first, it depends on what your relationship is with your pediatrician. And also recognizing that pediatricians, they have best intentions. They go into pediatrics to do best by their kid, by their patients and by the families that they serve. And also recognizing that the education about plant-based nutrition and how to do it healthfully, that's something that many of us learn because we're passionate about it. We've been exposed some way along the road, and I've taken it upon myself to become informed and to be comfortable with practicing in this way. But every doctor is not like that for lots of different reasons. That's another conversation. But I would say if you have a good relationship, bring in an article, direct them to a website. We have lots of wonderful resources now that are, medically robust and have great evidence, like Nutrition Facts, Dr. Greger's organization, the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, run by physicians who advocate for plant-based nutrition with robust, evidence to support it. I would direct your physician there to start to get to the source so they can educate themselves. I would just say, be respectful, be considerate and kind, and recognize it's kind of awkward sometimes for doctors to be challenged and to, I guess, discover a blind spot in knowledge. And so this being aware of some of the dynamics, but I would say gentle education is never a bad idea.
Wow, that's so cool. Do your patients come to you because you're plant-based or because you're just a good pediatrician and then they find out?
I think it's been both. I think I've started to get more involved in social media. And so I've had some patients come to me because they've discovered me on social media. But then the majority of my patient panel, they discover, oh, Dr. Huff, she's all about the soy milk and the beans and, the fruits and veggies. Like they discover it along the way and pretty early on along the way. And I'm like, did you know that the constipation that your child has could probably be reversed with cutting out the cow's milk? And they're like, oh.
Wow, you seem to have such a great attitude. You just seem like be such a great doctor.
I try. I love what I do. I think primary care pediatrics is definitely, it's a calling. And so there's few things better than being a kid doctor.
Wow. Well, Bendy, who's watching live, says, what a wonderful pediatrician that can teach families the benefits of plant-based eating and living a healthy lifestyle. I hope that many MDs will follow in her footsteps.
They are, thankfully. Thank you so much. Very, very sweet. And I've just been very heartened over the past year and a half or so of getting more entrenched in the lifestyle medicine community and the plant-based physician community specifically. There's so many of us and really integrated into every field and specialty of medicine. So this is a heartening time and it's only going to get better.
That is really cool. So Lori, who's watching live, said, are you familiar with Dr. Campbell's book, Whole? And how do you feel about a multivitamin for kids?
I am. I did the audiobook of Whole, very long audiobook. I think it was 24 hours. It's very long, but packed with information. I would say for children, typically, if I have a kid who's coming to me who has a well-balanced diet, they're getting in a nice diversity of fruits and veggies and specifically fruits and vegetables, then I would say, save your money and focus on a well-rounded diet. However, The reality is many kids are not getting a balanced diet. And also when it comes to like our plant-based kids specifically, I do find a multivitamin is a very efficient way to get what they need because they have the vitamin D in it. They've got the B12 in it. You know that they're getting adequate amounts. You can give them a tablet and call it a day while still not sacrificing a balanced diet. So at home for my 3-year-old, we do a multi for her that has her vitamin D and B12 in it. And I feel good about that. It's got a tiny bit of iron, which I don't think she needs because she eats a very well-rounded diet, but it's just like an extra little smidge to top her up if she needs it. And then we do a separate omega-3.
Nice, very good. So, you know what, the schools, I think they have contracts for foods, you know, and they offer milk. And
Mhm.
that's just not right. That like they almost insist that kids take it in a way.
They do. They do. It's been, I think there's a lot of advocacy going on to provide options, and especially advocacy when it relates to why are our nutritional guidelines what they are. And it relates to lobbying, you know, like big dairy is huge, powerful, lots of money to support their advocacy and lobbying in Congress to ensure that, you know, the dairy farmers have their way and that they get their products on the shelves and as a part of the guidelines. So I think that going upstream, we really need to continue to shine a light on that because that's really where the guidelines are flowing from, even in the face of, you know, the science. And so I think we're slowly moving, like there's more awareness about the fact that like cow's milk should not be the default, but it's been that way for decades and decades and hundreds of years. And so it's going to take time to fully change that narrative.
It's bizarre. And I mean, to me, it's like it's so bizarre that people think that this magical elixir is, you know, is the breast milk of another species that was meant for her. I mean, to me, it's like just the most bizarre concept.
It is. It when you really think about what cow's milk is and what purpose it exists for, which is to grow baby cows very rapidly into mature cows. That's literally not for us, but like that's where the role of like marketing comes in and, you know, lobbying and political interest, like that has created this very deeply ingrained narrative around the role of cow's milk where people just take it for granted. It's almost like a religion. It's like very dogmatic for folks. And so it takes a lot to turn that on its head. I think having the research and then also personal stories, the more people share that, hey, my kid has been plant-based, they've not had cow's milk and she's growing great. She's like at the top of her percentiles, like for height, like she's not stunted, you know, her bones are nice and strong. She's active, never broken a bone. I think hearing those personal stories help to shake that emotional connection, because that's kind of what it is that people have with milk. You think of like, oh, my grandma used to give me cookies and milk when I was a kid. I had the little milk mustache. First of all, you can get a milk mustache with soy milk. That works great. And then second of all, like there's definitely a dark side to milk that people just don't know about.
Yeah.
Don't know.
You know, so when it comes to milk and meat, you know, I'm sure there's people out there that believe that it's healthy and they're doing the right thing. But when I go to Costco and I see the parents pouring, you know, because at Costco with the drink refills or other places too, the soda, it's a free refill. And I see parents, you know, buying the soda. You get pizza and soda, I think, for like $1.50. And they take, I see this, I'm not kidding. It's not like I see it once. I see it all the time. And, you know, the kid's in the basket and the kid's is wide as it is tall, he or she, and they pour into the sippy cup the soda. I mean, can they really not know that that's not good?
I wish I could say I've never seen that. It's hard. I think this is an area that boils down to what you know and what your experiences are. That's what you pass down to your children. And I think that there are major, major gaps in nutritional knowledge, and not just like, oh, sugar is bad, but the fact that, I mean, high fructose corn syrup and thinking about cavities, thinking about rapid weight gain, thinking about the metabolic changes of like being exposed to those, you know, high loads of sugar, especially for children at such young ages. There's a gap in knowledge. And I think access is another thing. Like we have soda, it's so cheap. It's so widely available. It's the default for a lot of these fast food meals. And so I think that kind of normalizes it too. We're like, what's the big deal? It's everywhere. Like they can have a little from time to time or a lot from time to time. It's normal. And that's why, Sprouting Wellness is really about changing the narrative, like creating a culture of health, like as an antidote, as an alternative to this really twisted food system that prioritizes, these subsidy crops like the corn. That's why we have high fructose corn syrup everywhere, used in everything. Thinking about the GMO soy, there's a lot in our food system that creates the foods that we. There are a lot of I will say there are a lot of factors in our food system that are very upstream that create the foods of abundance that are super processed, that are very much not good for us. But those reasons are upstream. And so I think that needs to be a part of the conversation too, like how we can create more healthful defaults in our society and make it harder for people to like, I don't know, this is a tricky thing, but like making those products more expensive, like really the true cost of them. And then that would be a deterrent, I think, because they're cheap because they're subsidized.
Or maybe like cigarettes, put a warning label on them, or maybe you say, look, you got to be 18 to drink soda.
Exactly. Or in charging what they really cost, because a lot of these like super processed products are cheap because they have crop subsidies. Like we are incentivizing the farmers to grow these things that are created and or turned into processed products because they get government money to just grow these things in abundance. And then, oh, we got to use them. So more sugary drinks. Here we come.
And they're so evil. I don't know if you saw the interview. It was the very first interview of the Truth About Weight Loss Summit with Dr. Joan Iflin. And she talked about how when the tobacco, people may smoke, but I don't think anybody really believes it's good for you anymore. When they were losing customers, they brought up all the processed food industry. And so like they made like the juice box, because that's kind of like the cigarette box. And she talked about how this advertising is done to children. That should be illegal.
It really should be. It really should be. We have so many points with our marketing that is extremely predatory. There are a lot of predatory dimensions to our marketing. And the scary thing is we don't even know, we don't even realize we're being marketed to and manipulated because it's so, like very subtle. It can be very, very subtle. And one thing that I often talk about is even marketing to communities of color, and how that is, there are different degrees of marketing in terms of unhealthful products that are targeting communities of color, like Black and Latino communities. Kids tend to see like more frequent unhealthy food ads. And then the foods that companies tend to advertise directly, they tend to be the most unhealthy ones in their line. So there's a lot of complications and factors at play for sure.
So, well, thank you for doing everything you're doing to make it better. A couple of questions in the chat. So Tiffany says, do you accept new patients out of state? Are you doing any kind of telemedicine? Can a kid
I would be. Yeah. So good question. Thank you for asking that. So in my practice, really it's the DC, Maryland, Virginia area for primary care. And then for Sprouting Wellness, where I'm not taking on the role of primary care, but doing more lifestyle medicine consultations. That is, again, because of malpractice, it's going to be limited to the DC, Maryland area for now. But in the future, later this year, I'm going to be offering some group opportunities that will be open to folks in more diverse geographic areas. So go to my website and sign up for updates because there's going to be a lot rolling out this year. Including courses.
Neat. Brian says, can you ask the doctor the best way to contact her? I'd love to have her present to my pre-med colleagues in my pre-med pipeline group.
Very nice. So I keep calling you Dr. AJ. I have Dr. Very doctorly. But Chef AJ,
hilarious.
I know you have my contact information. Do you share that at all with folks?
I don't share with people, but he could probably find you on Instagram and send you a private message, right?
Definitely on Instagram, and then also on my website, there's a contact form, and those will be funneled to me as well.
Nice. Yeah. I generally don't put people's contact information.
Perfect. Thank you.
Unless yesterday's guest told her cell phone number, but I generally don't do that. Let's see. So do you grow broccoli sprouts?
Yes. Did someone just ask about
Yeah,
broccoli
Stephanie
sprouts?
says, I just found you on Instagram. It looks fabulous. You show that you grow broccoli sprouts. Do you grow any other seeds?
I'm a total newbie in the sprout game in terms of growing them. We eat them, but this is my first foray as an adult growing sprouts. Growing up, I actually grew up plant-based. My parents, they became like vegetarian in the 70s. And so my brothers and I were all raised plant-based on the spectrum of plant-based. And so growing up, like my mom would do alfalfa sprouts from time to time, but I was like, oh, that's something weird my mom does. 30 years later, I'm like, oh, my mom was onto something. She was onto something pretty major. And so over the last few days, my daughter and I have been on our broccoli sprout adventure. So I think today is day 3 of our sprouts, and they're really starting to come to life. Like we have a lot of great sprouting happening. So she's excited. This morning in the kitchen, when I was giving her breakfast, the cabinet was open because they're hidden in the dark cabinet to try to enhance growth. And so she's like, Mama, look at the sprouts. And they were just like really starting to grow a lot.
That's adorable.
It's super fun.
So Jordana says, wish we had doctors like her as a kid. A great name. Might be awesome to offer mommy and me cooking classes with kid-friendly recipes like bento boxes.
I love that idea. And there's definitely something in the works. I'm actually getting more into, I'm getting certified through Ruby, through their plant-based chef certification this year. And so I think as an outcropping of that, we'll be offering more kind of plant-based demo cooking. Chef AJ, future collaboration.
I call you Chef Dr. Huff or
Exactly.
Dr. Huff, whichever way you want to do. You know, I'm so sorry. I'm taking up so much of your time. I think you wanted to show some slides, and I didn't mean to delay that, but it was just, I just wanted to talk to you so much.
I know. And honestly, like we can do one of two things. Like the topic of my presentation today, which was really a handful of slides that talk about the intersection of plant-based nutrition and food equity. This is one of my passions. I have a master's in public health. And my M.P.H is focused on food systems and kind of food health disparities by way of food in a way. And so my talk today was about how we can reframe our personal plant-based eating in a way that helps to start to further more broader food equity in the general community. So it's a little bit of a niche topic, but
well, so here's the thing. What we could do is one of two things. We could just go do it now, or we can have you come back and do it, or we can pre-record it. So you got 3 choices.
Oh, maybe we can pre-record it because then it can be available because yeah, I prepared it for us today. But yeah, that will allow us to just keep talking.
I feel bad because I just was so excited to talk to you that I didn't respect your time. So yeah, we can do that. And then I can just give it to you. We can put it on whatever you want. I can do it.
Let's plan that because I think it will be interesting to your audience. And I think that, you know, in this particular moment, especially when many folks are interested in how can I be a change maker in my community? How can I show up for, you know, enhanced racial awareness and justice and how food plays a role in that? I think it's an interesting conversation. So,
yeah, and because it wouldn't be live, we can do it anytime. It wouldn't anytime your schedule. Okay, well, thanks, because then I can get to some more questions in the chat. Like one from Laura. Is soy milk preferred over almond milk? I know a couple of parents who give their toddlers almond milk.
Mm-hmm. That's a really great question. And really, it boils down to the nutritional profiles of these different plant-based milks, and they are quite different. And so I always encourage my families to turn the carton over, read the ingredients, and look at the nutrients. So if you compare almond milk to soy milk, there's a big difference in terms of protein specifically. Almond milk is essentially like filtered almond water. Like it is very, very light, which can be a great alternative for older kids or adults. I have no problem with, you know, them having almond milk. However, for younger children, you know, younger school age and certainly younger, I wouldn't do almond milk just because it's not as nutrient dense as I would want it to be. And if they're going to have water, drink water, but don't act like you're getting something more when it's really just almond flavored water, which is
so cool that you know that, because I didn't know that until a little while ago when I got this product that I love. It's called Joy. It's a concentrate of either cashew or almond, either organic or not. And you put a tablespoon and you make this delicious almond milk. And I'm like, why is this 88 calories and the box 30 calories. And
Right.
it took the CEO of the company to explain to me that when we buy it boxed, it's basically almond water. And then when we make it like with the Nutri-Milk machine or the concentrate, you're getting the whole, it's a whole different ball game.
Right. You get some of that added nutrients. And the other difference, almond milk is often a lower fat milk than the soy milk too, which in little kids, that's not a bad thing, because they need it. Their little bodies and brains are growing so quickly. So they're like, give me all the nutrients that you can.
That is so cool. So how do you advise families, like, it seems like the whole, if a family's going to eat healthy, you kind of almost need the whole family on board. And then you go to these social events and it's like, the aunts and the grandparents, it's like they don't always respect what the family is trying to do. And then, they feel it's, I think it's kind of disrespectful to do that to a kid, if I was somebody who was pet sitting my dog, I would be upset if they gave my dog something that wasn't what she
Right.
was supposed to eat. But it's like, I wanted to say, what the heck is wrong with people?
Yeah, that's a tricky one because family dynamics are so complicated, right? Like, they're hard. And so I think by and large, most family members do not intend disrespect. They simply don't understand the importance of why you are trying to feed your child in the way that you are. And I think that like sometimes we just don't have those conversations or we avoid those conversations because it can be kind of awkward. Like we have to justify why we're feeding our child a certain way when many of us don't want to have to justify that. We're like, this is my choice. This is how we eat in my household. And we just assume everybody's going to respect that. So I would say like one approach, have a conversation with the family. It doesn't have to be some like deep, long thing, but just big picture. Hey, this is how we're trying to approach nutrition and food in my household. Like, and I know we love family time, but at the same time, we really want to balance that out by making sure we are trying to be consistent as much as we can with how we feed our kid. So that's one aspect, education gently with your family. Number two, we have to kind of, I don't want to say lighten up, but kind of lighten up. So we are not going to attain perfection in anything we seek to do, right? We can do pretty darn good most of the time, but every now and then something might happen that's out of our control, right? And so I would just say parenting is already so full of expectations and, we want things to be a certain way. Sometimes you have to woosah and just let it go. And then after the fact, maybe doing some more gentle education. But one way that we try to approach it in my family is that at home, I try to do my best. We have whole plant foods, like the vast majority of meals. If we happen to be, obviously we haven't had any family gatherings really over the past year, but thinking about the future, I do want to make sure that they're all on the same page as me. Like, hey, my child doesn't have dairy. We try to, limit processed sugars and that sort of thing. Like these are our eating parameters. But if something were to happen where a family member who didn't get the brief gave her a cookie that had dairy chocolate chips, I will like take note, but I'm not going to like have a complete meltdown about it. Just let it happen and then move on from there. But I think that foundation really is at home. That's what we can control. We control what 3 meals and snacks we put on the table. And that is what our children are really going to learn from the most. And I think that remembering that as parents helps us to be less kind of like on edge if our kid happens to get in contact with something that we would prefer they not. I
Yeah.
hope that answers the
Yeah,
question.
no, thank you. Thank you. So, soy milk versus almond milk. What about breast milk?
Oh gosh, how much time do we have? We know breast milk is the best milk. And, the World Health Organization encourages us to breastfeed up until the child being 2 years old. That can be really hard in our like just really fast-paced culture. Our workplaces often don't make it easy for moms to breastfeed, even to 6 months, much less 2 years. But bottom line is the longer you can breastfeed, the better. And then I also really emphasize to a lot of my moms in clinic is some breast milk is going to be better than no breast milk. And so it doesn't have to be an either or for the little babies. And so I think the question was kind of geared towards that toddler, the post-infancy breastfeeding, maybe like the 1 to 2 year old crowd. And in that case, like if you're still producing milk, give that. They don't need any other source of milk if they're getting the breast milk from you. I think in general, we kind of emphasize milk more than we need to in general. Kids don't need milk. They don't need almond milk. They don't need soy milk. They don't need any kind of milk that's manufactured. If you're breastfeeding, give them that. But we want to focus on whole foods as much as possible for little kids, like getting them used to eating food instead of just drinking their calories.
How long, what is the longest a person should, or I remember I had this, this roommate a long time ago, and like she breastfed her kids till they were like 7.
It's a long time.
Yeah.
That's a long time. I'm like, listen, I my approach is I don't tell someone when to stop. However, if the child is very young, I try to do gentle encouragement to continue if they're, under 1 year old, so especially under 6 months old. But longer, more prolonged breastfeeding is really the prerogative of the mommy and the kid, and everybody has a different sense.
But is there a certain age like where you should stop, like maybe 18 or something?
You know, I'm gonna pass on that one.
I'm just no, you're adorable, really you are. But for people, there are people that like, I know I've learned so much from hosting the GI Health Summit, how important vaginal births and breastfeeding is.
Oh my God.
Unfortunately, I didn't have either, and I was kind of set up for not having a good GI system and things like that. But there, my mom didn't breastfeed because she said it wasn't fashionable in the 60s. So I was given formula, and and I suffered with food addictions and obesity my whole life. And I can't help thinking that formula, which is basically sugar, fat, and salt, was part of the problem. And it doesn't seem like they're doing any better creating formulas that are, I mean, maybe there's vegan ones, but they're still full of all the crap. Can't somebody just create a clean formula for children that are vegan and don't want sugar, oil, and salt in their formula?
Those things where it's like we are trying to emulate nature's best recipe and nature's perfect recipe. And I think it'll be a very, very, very long time until we're able to really create something that we were like, this is comparable. It's just a rough approximation. One thing that I have noticed with more modern and recent formulas is they're including HMOs, or human milk oligosaccharides, which are, substances that are in milk and in breast milk and human milk. And these HMOs are part of building a healthy gut microbiome. So they found a way to kind of isolate these and include them in formula as a way to kind of counter that criticism that, hey, we know that breast milk is just like far superior in terms of building that early gut microbiome. They're like, let's include this and see if that can help to kind of level the playing fields. And so formula science and development is extremely sophisticated, and it's a very large money-making a food product. And so I think the research is just going to continue. But I would say if you at all are able to breastfeed, that is what we should be doing. And I think that society is starting to catch up, because women aren't just breastfeeding in a vacuum. Like, we live in a world where like it's hard up until very recently to find like a breastfeeding station, a place to pump if you're pumping, having workplaces that have dedicated space to breastfeed. All these things contribute to how long women are able to breastfeed. And so I always have like my policy lens on too, where it's like, what are the things that we can engineer as a society to make it easier for women to do the best by their babies? Because all too often we put the onus of just like, oh, women just aren't breastfeeding because they don't want to. Many women want to, but it's just like we don't have the broader society support. That's super real. Like breastfeeding, yeah, I can keep going, but I will let you jump in.
Aren't there women that donate breast milk to mothers?
Yes.
Like, why don't they just get more of those, and why don't we just pump those ladies all
I know.
and just to...
There is a lot of advocacy and like grassroots movement happening to make breast milk more accessible to those who can't, or for whatever reason, produce milk. And like, I even like donated some milk when I was breastfeeding during that period of time. I had a little bit more than we needed. So I felt really good about that. But I think that there's a lot of informal breast milk sharing happening. And then also, like you said, the more formalized breast milk banks that do, screening of donors and making sure the milk is clean and that sort of thing. So I think it's, again, the needle is slowly moving in the right direction. It is.
What is the composition of breast milk? And the reason I ask is when people say, well, vegans don't get enough protein,
Mhm.
I would imagine that is when a child needs the most protein, is when they're an infant. And breast milk's not very high in protein, is
It's
it?
not. It's mostly carbohydrates. It's mostly carbs, and I don't want to misspeak by giving you exact percentages, but basically it's the macronutrients. It's mostly carbs, some protein, and some fat. And the magic of breast milk is it changes its recipe, its composition over the lifespan of the child. So newborn breast milk is going to be different than, a 3 or 4 month old's breast milk. And that kind of trend continues. And so it's not static, it's extremely dynamic. Which is why, two things come to mind. One, a lot of times as babies who are formula fed, parents naturally increase the amount of milk that they give. So like what a newborn is drinking is going to be a fraction of what a 6-month-old formula fed baby is drinking. But the magic of breast milk is that what they need really stays static and the composition of the milk changes. Because I find a lot of my breastfeeding mommies, they're like trying to give their like 3-month-old like 6 ounces of breast milk. They don't need that. So like the best standard is like keeping it around like 4 ounces or so per feed, and knowing that that fat composition is going to change, that carb composition is going to change. Baby's going to get what they need without kind of overstuffing them.
Right. Great. Thank you. Well, Lori says, what do you think are the perfect solid foods for babies and at what age should they start? This is a perfect segue to the breastfeeding.
It is. It is. 6 months old is our, the American Academy of Pediatrics and World Health Organization. We advocate for 6 months, if possible, of exclusive breastfeeding or exclusive milk for babies. And then after 6 months, I tell my families, have fun. Many of our whole plant foods really easily lend themselves to baby foods. So whether it's like a ripe banana, you mash it up very smoothly, create a puree. You can always add breast milk or your baby infant milk to smooth it out, get it nice and thin as an easy consistency. Avocado, that was my baby's first food when we first started solids at 6 months. Like a nice, ripe, beautiful avocado, mash it up in a bowl, baby food, added a little bit of breast milk to smooth it out. Sweet potatoes, that was another of our favorites. Really, whatever you all are having for dinner, reserve some, steam it, puree it, mix a little bit of your milk in, and you have instant baby food. And so I try to really encourage keeping it simple, keeping it fresh, and really trying to add that variety in as early on in life as possible, getting those green leafies exposed, and obviously like our diverse fruits and fruits as well.
Yeah. I mean, kids don't just hate vegetables, right?
No, but veggies can be more bitter, right? Like they're not as like immediately palatable as like fruit. Like you can't go wrong with fruit with most kids, but with especially the green leafies, it is a little bit more of a practice food for many kids because they do tend to be a bit more bitter. But it's really exposure, 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 and you learn to love it. Like we do a lot of spices at home. My 3-year-old now, she has a very good threshold for like spiciness, like heat in a food, because we do cayenne and other kind of spicy things. And this was a process of like repeat exposure, 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 because we wanted her to be able to eat the food that we make at home, instead of like having to have like a separate proportion for her. And so now she's like, Mommy, that's a little spicy, but it's still good. So now she eats spicy food. But that came with a concerted effort of repeat exposure over and over and over and over again over a span of time.
Yeah. How strict do you think parents should be with giving their kids sugar? Because, I there's very few people that lived a whole life without sugar, but the kids
Yeah.
that I met that were raised that way, like Dr. Goldhammer's son, I
Mhm.
mean, their health and they're extraordinary. Like they never had acne, they
Mhm.
never got sick,
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think sugar is so hard. And I think it depends kind of more broadly on what is your eating style in general at home? Like, and by that, I mean specifically, like, where are you on the spectrum of like whole food, plant-based versus more processed convenience and maybe still plant-based? Because the more you move from that whole food, unprocessed, plant-based diet to the more processed one, you're going to automatically get that sugar in there. So like added sugar is a huge source for many families. And then obviously there's those other more obvious forms like our the sweetened drinks. We're thinking about baked goods and obvious sources of sugar. I would say as much as you can, again, making home your healthy haven. And so by that, I mean, again, kids are a part of the broader world, right? They live out, they go to school. And that's another thing we can talk about is the school environment and how there's such an emphasis on everything is a food-based celebration. And oftentimes those foods are very, very unhealthful. But my point is that do your best at home, trying to limit what you cook with in terms of sugar, trying to emphasize more of the fruits instead of, sugar added snacks and that sort of thing. Because that kind of takes some of the stress away when kids are out in the world, although you might have to create boundaries there very well. But at least you can know that 80 to 90% of the time, I have control over what my kid eats. And really do your best to make that as sugar-free as possible. But less is more. That's the bottom line. Like as close to zero as possible, the better.
Can I just say I love you? I wish you were my doctor. You're just so inspiring and articulate. And I just love that you exist in the world. So I have
the feeling is mutual.
Yeah. And I'm kind of happy we didn't get to the slides because now I get another opportunity to talk to you. So
exactly. It all works out.
I love it. I just quoted you on the chat, make your home a healthy haven.
Yes.
That's the ticket. I mean, every day, I work with people in weight loss and food addiction. And the problem is always their house. It's always their environment. It's not what they ate when they went to France and had a piece of cheese. It's that nobody cleans up their environment.
It is. It is. It's very, very hard. But once you do it, it makes everything so much easier. And I'm a big fan in terms of creating systems, like not having to use willpower every step of the way to do the health promoting thing. Make your environment work for you as much as you can so that you have systems and routines set up that will help you help yourself when maybe you do get a food urge to have something, but you already have that system set up where I just don't have cookies in my house. That means you can't have a cookie if you get the hankering for a cookie.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's a good question. My audience is awesome. I got to thank you guys. I love the people that I call them my Zamunity because many of them show up every day. I've been doing this show for almost a year now. I think we're almost at 500. But I love the questions because it really helps me out. Like this one from Stephanie. What do you think about offering common allergen foods to infants?
That's a very good question. And I've seen one product, and the name is escaping me at this moment, but there's a product on the market created by pediatric allergists that essentially is a protein derived powder of many of the common food allergens that your kid might be exposed to or should be exposed to early on, because what we know kind of big picture, early exposure seems like that reduces risk of developing food allergies. And there was a LEAP study, that was the big study done in terms of peanuts, early peanut protein exposure, and a heavy reduction in peanut food allergy. And so that same wisdom has been applied across the board to all of our other big food allergens. So if you are strictly plant-based, then maybe one of those powders, and it's like a whole system, you take them with a certain frequency per week for some number of preset weeks. And that can be a great alternative. If you're on the plant-based spectrum, but still maybe do some fish from time to time, then that's something that, thinking about allergy risk, that could be something if that fits into your family's eating style.
Nice. Very nice. I wish my mom was alive so I could ask her this, but when I was 4 years, my mom drank coffee every day with cream and sugar. And when I was 4 years old, she just let me taste it. And that was not such a great thing because then I just kept drinking it because it was good.
The taste was there, right?
Well, because it had the caffeine, it had the sugar, it had all that, and plus I was allergic to milk, which wasn't a great thing. But Mom, what the heck were you thinking? So, here's a question: have you seen any kids with COVID?
I have. In my clinic, we alternate in terms of who does more primary care visits versus urgent care. So when I'm the urgent care physician, I do swab for COVID, and I have had quite a few positive cases. Fortunately, every single kid, and I'm racking my memory, every single one has done quite well. They've even been asymptomatic or having no symptoms, or very mild, looking kind of like a cold, and maybe a little bit step up from a common cold, but certainly nobody that's needed hospitalization. or any kind of next level medical care. So all my kids have been doing really, really well. But I will say this is in a greater context of some children do not do so well. There's still, fortunately, the slim minority, but there's definitely a multi-system inflammatory condition that some children have developed in the midst of COVID infections. And so there's always that kind of low risk, but serious risk of complication. But fortunately, everybody that I've seen has done really well.
Wow. Well, what is a child's immune system like? Because they keep saying with COVID, it's what's going to determine our outcomes is our immune system. So when kids are young, are their immune systems pretty strong? Is that why they're able to withstand this?
I think it's complicated. Like the immune system shows up in different ways when we talk about COVID. One is kind of what is like the baseline state of your immune system function? Like how well are you able to kind of withstand this infection and conquer it? And I think that that's one of the first differences between children and healthy children and adults when we think about chronic disease risk. And many people at the root of these chronic diseases, whether it's diabetes or heart disease, even thinking about some of our like cognitive dementias, is in inflammation. And so there's already kind of like a state of overactivity with the immune system, which can definitely interact negatively with COVID. So that's one of the big differences between children. And then also thinking about like how there are other kind of pathophysiology differences between children and adults, but I think that that kind of initial baseline is one of the key differences. But immune system is also different for very young babies. And that's one of the big things as a higher risk population, that the kids under 1, where they have more of that immature immune system. Like they're not as well able to withstand and fight the infection. And that's one of the subpopulations of kids that we tend to be more conservative with, just because they are so young. They literally don't have the same defenses that you would as an older child or adult, certainly. So that is the exception to the kind of better functioning immune system that older kids versus like an adult with chronic disease might have.
Are kids able, whether they're symptomatic or asymptomatic, are kids able to transmit COVID to like teachers and parents when the schools open up again?
It's possible. It's possible for sure. But we are still, I think, recognizing that the transmission rates among kids to adults, they can transmit it for sure. But it seems like it's the reverse more often than the kid to adult. It's more often, it looks like the adult to the kid. But it can happen in any direction. And the importance of vaccinating, there's been huge pushes to get teachers vaccinated. Just because, again, like they are frontline workers and there are occupational risks associated with returning to the classroom. And it is certainly possible for children to pass it to adults. But it's less than, what we often think about kids are like little germ factories during like the common cold season and they're passing it to everybody. It hasn't been that way, which is why we haven't seen these explosions in childcare centers and preschools that have remained open.
Right. Well, do you think kids will eventually, they'll make them get this vaccine? Because right now they're the lowest priority, right?
Are the lowest priority. The clinical trials are slowly reducing the age of enrollees. And so I think I most recently heard that they were enrolling kids as young as 12. When in the original studies, they were as low as 16 years old. And so I think that as we lower that threshold of inclusion in the studies, we're going to have that more reliable data to show safety. And then it will be available to children. But even amongst adults, unless you work in with a vulnerable population, like in an elder care facility or nursing home, I haven't seen any mandates to get vaccinated just yet. And so I think it will be a while, if and when that were to happen. But first and foremost, it will just be an option for families who want to vaccinate their children, that now we've had the safety data come out and now it's available to children if they choose to get it.
Right. Good. So Van says, I thought if a baby is breastfed, the mother's immune system is passed on to the baby.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. There's still a lot of research happening in terms of like how COVID functions in these various like scenarios. But what we know in terms of, immunology and breast milk and how things get transmitted, there's certain things called antibodies that do get transmitted through mother's milk. And we have no reason to believe that that's not the case for COVID. But the reality is not every baby is breastfed. And also we don't know what is the degree of protection? Like there are a lot of fine details that we just don't know because it hasn't been studied, sufficiently yet. But yes, in general, for sure, breast milk is going to be protective for everything from A to Z, essentially.
Right. Great. Here's a fun question from RM. What is your Peloton leaderboard name? I
Oh
would
my
love
gosh.
to ride my bike with her.
I would love to ride my bike with you. It's DOC underscore Dira, DIRA. I am in love with my Peloton. I ride it almost every day. For the past like 6 weeks, I've been a part of, it's a Black women physician Peloton group that I'm a part of. And so we've been competing with their like Power Zone challenge this winter. So it's been a lot of fun to have that like solidarity. But I love riding and I would love to ride with you.
Nice. I don't have a Peloton. I have a Kaiser, but I do ride every
Oh, you
day.
do? Nice, 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 nice. I mean, having some sort of workout equipment at home has been such a godsend over the past year. Such a godsend. I'm like very grateful to have it.
Right. Well, I want to respect your time, but our mutual friend Sharon McRae just texted me a great question, which I think would be a nice way to end our wonderful conversation. What's the best first step for parents who want to get their kids to start eating well?
Oh, thank you, Sharon. That's a great question. Oy, the
So
best first.
cute that you say "oi."
Uh-huh. So I would start with asking what area do they want to change in? And I ask that just because change is so personal and change really ideally comes when there is a desire inherently to tweak or change something instead of it being kind of like an external thing. So I would say have that internal assessment of, hey, we recognize that eating healthy is pretty broad. Like there's so many different components to that. So which component do we want to focus on as a family? Is it we want to be mindful about cutting down on our sugar? We're going to stop buying soda. We're going to stop buying juice. We're going to focus on water as our sole source of hydration. That's great. And that is homegrown. That's an internally derived goal. If your family is more of like, we know that we really want to work on increasing our vegetable intake, that's a great goal. Let's make it specific. Let's say, hey, at every dinner, we're going to have one green leafy vegetable, and we're going to experiment with cooking it in different ways until we find something that we really enjoy. That would be a great goal. But my point is it needs to be internal, and it's not one size fits all for every family. And I would encourage families to start with what matters to you, because that's going to give you that follow through that's so needed with behavior change.
Yeah, it must be hard knowing what you know when you see people not doing the right.
Oh, yes, that's an understatement. And I genuinely care. But sometimes when people care so much, I have to be very mindful about being moderate and being temperate, just because people are people, right? Like we're complicated. Everybody's ability to change and desire to change is different. And so it's a balancing act, right? Of like being motivating and sharing information, but also giving space for people to have their own journey too.
Wow, that's great. You have just a wonderful way about you. And Judy's saying, this was an awesome interview. Thank you for introducing us to her. Can't wait for the pre-recorded talk. Also, beautiful skin and teeth. Do you have any secrets, any beauty secrets?
Floss every day. That's a big one. And yeah, I mean, I've had my ups and downs of skin. So thank you for saying that. Eating more fruits and vegetables and cutting the sugar as much as possible.
Absolutely. Sugar really does age people. I say that because before I was a chef, I worked at retirement homes, and the people that ate sugar, or a lot of it, versus the ones that hardly did, you could see the difference in their skin.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, so much of our lifestyle shows up on our external bodies, whether it's like, do we exercise? Are you smoking? Are you getting adequate sleep? Are you hydrating? All of these things show up and they pile on. So
Yeah.
I think living the good lifestyle helps, and meditating.
Yeah. Well, we can talk about that too. That's the one thing that I haven't quite yet accomplished. But if you guys love Dr. Huff as much as I do, hop on over to Instagram and follow her.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Chef AJ. I almost said Dr. AJ.
That's it. I almost said Chef Huff, so we're even. Well, I can't wait to have you back for the talk that we're going to record, which was the one we were going to give today. But this was lots of fun, so I'm glad we did it.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much. And thanks all of you for watching another episode of Chef AJ Live. Please come back tomorrow when my guest is Dr. Michelle Bailey. But before tomorrow, if you come back at 2 p.m., I'll have another wonderful doctor talking about heart disease, Dr. Cyrus Kambata. Thanks again, Dr. Huff. It was wonderful meeting you.
Wonderful.